Thanks for joining me right here at One Nation Weather. In this update, I've got the main headline being the final updates for this near-term winter storm that I'm going to be breaking down that's set to impact a lot of the east as we go through the next 24 to 48 hours with anything from tornadoes to snow. Then after that, I've got to look ahead to the next storm that could bring big snow to some parts of the central and eastern U.S. into this upcoming week. Plus, I'll talk about all of the very cold temperatures, some of the coldest air of winter so far, expanding across parts of the country into the upcoming pattern. All those details right ahead. All right, here we are looking at the overview graphic I've made for the winter storm, especially set to impact the United States as we go through the next 24 to 48 hours. You can see things will really pick up out of the central and then as we push towards the eastern U.S. with flooding and severe storms being a big risk, anywhere from the Ohio Valley back down to the lower Mississippi Valley and then points through at least the southeast coast as we get out of Saturday and into Sunday. We're going to be watching some snow wrapping back around the end of this event, even in some of the zones that could start with flooding and severe weather. Best chance for more uninterrupted snow that will have heavier totals, though, going to be in some parts of the Great Lakes and interior Northeast regions, while closer to the northeast coast of the U.S., we're going to be looking at more ice and then just transitioning over to rain through the duration of this event. The severe weather aspect of this system is the most major impact that we're going to be seeing, so I'm going to break that down first. Then we'll talk about winter weather impacts, then we'll just talk about the wind that everybody could see. I'll cover all of that right here as we get through the rest of this video, so stick around and use the timestamps in the description. But let's go ahead and start with that severe weather forecast. Let's start here giving you a look at the forecasted severe weather risk on my 0 to 7 scale as we go through our Saturday, and this will include the Saturday night and early Sunday time frame as well. From parts of Texas over to Georgia, the Carolinas, all the way up to Kentucky, many of these zones, especially in the dark greens at least, having a risk for isolated severe weather being likely, but especially as you get into those yellows, oranges, and reds, that's where this risk is going to be highest there, including parts of Louisiana, Arkansas, up into Mississippi, as well as Tennessee and Alabama. This comes as a line of storms, as well as occasional supercells, those are discrete thunderstorms, are expected to lead to an event of severe weather, with some tornadoes, a few of which could be strong on the side of EF2 or greater. Gusty winds, some of which could be over 70 miles per hour, especially in the orange and red zones on your screen, as well as isolated hail. Those will all be threats. Again, the highest risk there in northern Mississippi and southern Tennessee. And the risk doesn't stop there as we go through the overnight hours of tonight, and then as we go through at least the first half of the day, Sunday, as well as into some parts of the afternoon, a risk of isolated thunderstorm-related damaging winds and a few tornadoes will persist. As we go towards some areas of the East Coast, that will be from Florida, Georgia, and the Carolinas, all the way up the mid-Atlantic shorelines. So let's go ahead and time out the flooding and severe weather aspects of the storm right now. Then we'll talk about winter weather again a little bit later on. All right, here we are looking at the latest full run of the HRRR model and its simulation for what's going to happen as we go through the next 24 to 48 hours with flooding and severe weather. First of all, one thing I want to point out as we go through the morning into the early afternoon, and it will continue beyond this point in time across some areas here of the Ohio Valley back down into the mid-Mississippi Valley. This zone right here from Kentucky back to eastern parts of Arkansas and Missouri, points in between including northern Tennessee, we're going to be watching training rainfall here throughout the day. Yes, we'll have rain over to the mid-Atlantic. We'll see storms that develop back to the southwest of this, of course, but this is going to be the main zone where rain continues running over the same spots over and over throughout the day, throughout the evening as that storm line continues to build in as well. This is going to lead to possibly some spots getting upwards of 6 inches of rain in locally higher amounts. And that is going to be dangerous. In fact, it could cause very extreme flooding in some isolated instances, with many areas at least seeing moderate flooding. So please be on the lookout for this. This is going to cause flash flood concerns that will only continue to build up as we go throughout the day in some of these locations. Let's go ahead and start talking about the severe weather, though, because I think things will begin to build up around this time, 1, 2, 3 p.m. Central Time. Starting to watch this line forming back up through parts of Arkansas into far east Texas and Louisiana, and I think it begins just firing up even more by the time we get here towards 3, 4, 5 o'clock, where places like Jonesboro down to Little Rock to Pine Bluff could at least watch for an isolated to scattered damaging wind threat, and we'll also have to watch some of these storms that could be a little bit more broken up, but that can actually help increase the isolated to scattered and tornado risk as we start to see these cells move out of parts of Texas into Louisiana around or after that dinner time frame. Here we go, as we get into the later evening, that's when things are going to really start to ramp up more, where I've got multiple concerns. Obviously, some of that flooding that's going to continue up into the Ohio Valley, but notice this line of storms right here that's going to be near the Mississippi River around, and then thereafter sundown towards 6, 7, 8 o'clock Central. We are going to have some cells out ahead of it, maybe even as far to the east as Middle Tennessee by this point in time. We'll have some cells running through parts of western Mississippi ahead of this line as it moves in as well. Any of these discrete supercells that are able to tap into the very favorable environment with changing winds in the atmosphere ahead of the line, Those are going to be the best chance ones for tornadoes, but of course we're also just going to have the line itself, which will have mainly the damaging wind threat, but also those embedded tornadoes. And by the way, that threat could also elevate down here towards parts of the Gulf Coast, where we're going to have a good chance as we go towards 9, 10, 11 o'clock this evening for round after round of those isolated supercells trying to run out ahead of the line, moving on through, and then that damaging wind threat could also come through with that main line itself. Isolated tornadoes and damaging winds look to continue to be a factor, and again, some of these winds, especially as the line moves through this zone right here, that's why I highlighted this as your highest severe weather risk through western Tennessee into northern Mississippi. I think we're going to have that threat for especially significant straight line winds coming through here as we get through the late evening, and this line's going to race east as we go through the night tonight, leading to places like Nashville possibly getting some damaging wind all the way up to Bowling Green there in Kentucky, and then especially here through parts of Alabama back down to Mississippi. This is where that tornado threat could also be continued to be elevated with some of those supercells that we see embedded in the line and right out ahead of it through the evening and overnight. And by the time we get here towards 3, 4 o'clock in the morning Sunday, more storms pushing through Birmingham down to Montgomery, starting to shift east towards Atlanta, where again, damaging winds and isolated tornadoes could continue to be a factor. I think the tornado threat does really wane by this point towards 6, 7 in the morning on Sunday. But even here, as we see some of these storms push through parts of central Georgia, including Macon up to Greenville, South Carolina, Charlotte, North Carolina, and then points east, again, we will still have to watch isolated damaging winds and possibly some isolated tornadoes with any of these cells that continue progressing towards the East Coast. And a lot of these will be pushing off the East Coast by the time we get past about 1, 2 o'clock Eastern time here into our Sunday afternoon. We could even see some gusty winds with some of these storms, and you got to watch out for some of these systems. They can spawn up little weak tornadoes even in some of these cells back here, I'd argue, towards parts of central Pennsylvania with the amount of wind energy that will be in the atmosphere. Overall, though, the severe weather threat really decreasing, obviously, by the time we get into our Sunday afternoon. Before we move on into talking about some of the winter weather aspects of this storm, here's a quick look at the forecasted rainfall by the time we get here through the end of our Sunday and into our early Monday. I think we'll certainly have the best chance for flooding to be in that zone I was talking about when I started that severe weather discussion. Right in here as you come out of parts of Arkansas, up into parts of northern Mississippi, over into Tennessee, Kentucky, southern Indiana, parts of Ohio, and West Virginia. Any of these zones, widespread 2 to 5 inches of rain, some spots getting closer to 6 to 10 on that very high end. And I think Kentucky and northern Tennessee is going to be the best chance for those more extreme flooding impacts that could be possible. Otherwise, a lot of these zones and the blues and oranges, still at least some isolated flooding with any of this energy that pushes east, where we see rain even up into parts of the mid-Atlantic and northeast, but it's going to be more isolated with 1 to 2 inch totals more likely there. Now on the other side of things, of course, we got to time out that winter weather, and let's go ahead and start here around and after when I'm recording this video, where we're going to be watching some patches of snow. That's going to kind of be the theme into some parts of Iowa, Illinois, Wisconsin today. Better chance for more of a heavier band of snow is actually going to be in the northeast U.S. as we go through our Saturday afternoon hours, parts of Pennsylvania into parts of northern New Jersey, and then up here to New York, Vermont, New Hampshire, Massachusetts, Connecticut, Rhode Island. We're going to pick up with some snow, and it could even accumulate to some heavier totals as we get through this evening. But overnight tonight, a lot of this is going to turn over to ice, and then eventually rain as the warm front lifts north into our Sunday. That's going to mean a mess with slushy conditions and some of those icy roads also eventually becoming a problem. Let's go ahead and play this side of the system out so that you can kind of see that ice line transitioning north. It will already be doing that and moving up through places like New York City, where we'll transition over to ice and then rain once the sun goes down this evening. What about back on over here on the western side of this storm around that time? This is where we're actually going to start with rain and then transition over to snow, as opposed to starting with snow and then transitioning over to rain. By around 8, 9 o'clock, I think we're going to start to see our band of snow that's going to tail this storm and eventually start shifting north and east with that tailing band, beginning even as far back to the southwest as northeast Oklahoma, all the way up here to north central parts of Indiana around Fort Wayne, points in between Springfield, Illinois. Watching the possibility for some brief snow this evening. Notice that's going to continue to develop into the overnight, and it looks like we're going to have that kind of thin band, maybe from places like Detroit, all the way back down through Lafayette there in Indiana, and then back down to Springfield, Missouri. It's going to be a thin band, but it's going to continue to progress east on the tail end of this system with that final area of frontal boundaries, so to speak, as we go through the overnight hours. And that's going to lead to a lot of spots that get rain through most of this event, transitioning over to snow as we get into some parts of our Sunday. What's going to be going on around 1, 2 a.m. into our Sunday on up here in the northeast, that continued transition from snow turning to ice, and that's going to mean for a mess here in some parts of central New York over into parts of especially Massachusetts, Connecticut, Rhode Island, where this ice and sleet is going to last for more likely an extended period of time. As we go through our Sunday morning, snow is going to continue to progress on up here into parts of the interior Northeast where it will last longer, though. And also look at what's going to be happening Sunday morning from parts of eastern Michigan all the way back down here to Indiana, parts of western Kentucky, possibly transitioning over to some moderate to heavy snow to cap off this event as the system becomes stronger while it wraps around. Let's zoom out so that you can get the big picture of what's going to be happening as we go through 7, 8, 9 o'clock. We'll look at how this picks up heavy snow into parts of the interior Northeast, including Montpelier, Vermont, up to Bangor, Maine, and then eventually into northern Maine, where we're going to have less of a chance of being interrupted by ice. Snow will be a big factor continuing through Detroit, at least through midday tomorrow. Cleveland, Akron, Columbus, Ohio will also get some brief snow that could have some wind-driven snow as well as we get through 11, 12, 1 o'clock in the afternoon. And then look at this. We just continue at least through Sunday evening with this snow, and this is where we're going to get the heaviest totals into the interior Northeast, where it lasts pretty much through the entire event. With that timing in mind, here's a look at the projected snowfall totals in the Midwest and Great Lakes and Ohio Valley region as we get through the end of Sunday into early Monday here with the National Digital Forecast Database. A lot of this snow into Iowa, Wisconsin going to be falling here during the near term with some of the banding that's been going on around and after when I'm recording this video. A couple of additional inches possible here through the near term, but it's going to be especially south and east of this line that I'm drawing right here, where we're going to see that snow that caps off the event wrapping up with that system as we go overnight Saturday night and into Sunday morning. That's going to lead to a lot of spots out of far northeast Oklahoma, through Missouri, especially the central and eastern parts of the state, into parts of Illinois, Indiana, and I'd argue some parts of Kentucky as well, to pick up anywhere from around a dusting to a couple of quick inches of snow to wrap up this event. The same will go over here into some parts of central Kentucky, southern Ohio, and eventually into parts of eastern Kentucky and West Virginia. Where we see our snow totals pick up, though, is where we're going to have that north to south snow band setting up, and that's going to be through a lot of Michigan, where most spots get at least 4 inches of snow, the purples and pinks indicating more like 6 to 12 as you get there into the eastern part of the glove, which could include those especially northern suburbs of Detroit. A couple of inches at least possible here into northern Indiana, as well as some parts of northern Ohio through this event as well. Then as we pivot on up here into parts of the northeast U.S., you can see again a lot of our snowfall down into parts of southern New England going to be with the initial part of this event. We're down here out of parts of Pennsylvania and then over into northern New Jersey, southern New York, Connecticut, Rhode Island, Massachusetts, many spots picking up at least a couple of inches of snow, possibly more like 4 to 6 as you get on up there into places like Boston and Worcester. We could get 4 to 6 inches of snow there. It's just going to turn over to ice and rain eventually, where that's less likely it's going to be on up here in these far interior northeast zones, where we're going to at least briefly maybe see a transition to ice or sleet, but not fully rain, and that's going to allow for your snow totals to be upwards of 6 to 12 through a lot of northern New York, Vermont, New Hampshire, and Maine, and far northern Maine and New York and Vermont, New Hampshire. Some of these spots could be upwards of a foot of snow. What about the ice that we're going to be seeing down there into some of the central parts of the Northeast, out of parts of Pennsylvania into central New York, northern New Jersey, Connecticut, Rhode Island, a lot of Massachusetts, over into Vermont, New Hampshire, and Maine. All of these zones looking at a lot of spots getting upwards of a 1/10 to a quarter of an inch of ice. That could be enough for some isolated power outages, but definitely at least some slick spots on roadways as this moves through tonight and into our Sunday with that line progressing north. So please take it slow or just avoid travel. And even if it affects any church or shopping plans that you might have into your Sunday morning, might be a good day to stay off the roads, especially with the next impact I'm about to break down and the final one that I'm going to talk about for this storm. That impact is going to be the gusty wind that is going to impact so many with this system. You can see some winds picking up, especially on the tail end of this system in a broader sense as we get through our Saturday evening. We're back here over parts of the Central Plains into the mid-Mississippi Valley. Lots of spots will get 25 to 35 mile per hour gusts from the north and west. It's going to be as we get into our Sunday, though, where a lot of gusts pick up over a lot more zones. Look at this. By the time we get towards around Sunday 7 a.m., whether it's right out ahead of this storm or with some of the winds that are going to be wrapping around with that heavy snow on the tail end, I'm telling you, that snow will blow around with whatever we see moving through parts of the Ohio Valley and Great Lakes by the time we get into our Sunday morning, because many gusts, especially in those greens, expected to be upwards of 30 miles per hour. Biggest place for gusts out of this entire event, though, is currently projected to be into some parts of the mid-Atlantic, where look at what our gusts could be as we go towards around mid-afternoon Sunday. Very strong in this particular zone, where some spots are going to get upwards of 50 mile per hour wind gusts out of Virginia into the Delmarva region, into Pennsylvania and New Jersey. And even with some of that snow and ice that we get on up here into the interior Northeast, it could definitely be near blizzard-like conditions with a lot of spots getting 30 to 40 mile per hour gusts even into the early part of Monday, and the wind will pick up into the Northeast again on Monday afternoon. As if we haven't talked about enough already, and this video isn't much longer already than my usual ones are, let's go ahead and jump ahead and give you a look at what's going to be next in this crazily active stretch of weather. It looks like as we go through our Sunday, February 16th, this doesn't look like much, but we're going to see some energy collecting with the rain in the valleys there of Washington, Oregon, California, mountain snow, and that's eventually going to feed your next winter storm that's going to dive right on out here. A little bit further south, though, because we've got colder air that's so dry into the north central U.S., it's going to force some of that moisture to be a little bit further south with this next one. You're going to see some snow, and this is not yet, their full forecast for this particular system, just an overview of what's going to happen. As we go out on Monday into Tuesday, some snow developing into parts of the central U.S., especially forming with our next larger scale winter system looking likely. From heavy rain down in Texas and Louisiana to ice in Oklahoma and Arkansas, possibly some snow up there into some parts of the northern parts of those states, as well as into Kansas and Missouri into our Tuesday evening. This is all going to push east by the time we go out of Tuesday through Wednesday night and into Thursday. And I'm sure you're already seeing the buzz and the crazy hype that this is the craziest storm of winter. Let's hold back on that for now. But it certainly could be interesting here with very heavy nor'easter conditions, maybe even blizzard-like conditions trying to develop towards parts of the mid-Atlantic and northeast sometime out of Wednesday into Thursday. The system could be a little bit further south, could be a little bit further north. This is still about 5 days away from when I'm recording this video, so we've got some time to figure out the furthest extent of this system, to say the least, especially into the Thursday morning time frame where it could go up the East Coast. I'm just telling you, I've got more updates to come that are going to be on the way on that, because that looks like a pretty significant system as well. Last but not least, I can't let you go without talking temperatures, as always, right here on the channel. Notice the high contrast here for our Saturday, as I'm recording this video into our Saturday afternoon, looking at temperatures expected to be 60s and 70s as far north as Kentucky today. Teens and even single digits for peak temperatures, those highs back on the cold side of this system that's going to be ushering in that Arctic blast coming out of parts of the north central U.S., and eventually it's going to expand down into a lot more zones of the central and eastern parts of the country into next week. Let's look at the forecast lows as we go out of Saturday and into our Sunday morning. Up here into parts of Montana, we've got Wyoming, into parts of the Dakotas, Minnesota, Nebraska, Iowa. A lot of spots is 0 to even single digits and teens below 0 here. We're going to be seeing this line indicating spots a little bit further south getting as low as about freezing at least. Many spots down into the 20s, even as far south as North Texas. Interior Northeast will, of course, be cold Sunday morning as well, as we're watching the winter weather evolving there. Sunday afternoon, still going to be warm east of this line, but it's going to cool down from west to east pretty quickly as we go later into the day. And look at this again, strong flow of single digits and teens all the way on down here as far to the east as places like northern Missouri, parts of Wisconsin, just hitting 15 to 20 degrees for highs Sunday afternoon. And then Monday morning is when the brutal cold really begins, and I'll touch on this more, I'm sure, in my Sunday video that's likely on the way. North of this line, many spots are going to be down below 0, and up here into Montana, the Dakotas, Minnesota, -20 to -30 with colder wind chills. That's very, very dangerous cold, and in fact, some of the very coldest we've seen all winter up here. That is not a lie, and it's just going to continue with the high temperatures as well into Monday afternoon, looking very dangerous as many spots will stay in the negatives, and even all the way down to the interior northeast and the northeast coast of the U.S. Monday afternoon, below freezing. With that being said, that is all I have for this extended update video. Again, normally my videos are closer to 10 to 12 to 14 minutes long. This weekend's dangerous weather, plus everything else that's ahead, deserved a longer one, so if you want more in the future, make sure to hit that subscribe button down below, check out the links in the description, and I'll see ya right here next time.
One nation weather.